Hello, everybody, and welcome to your new episode of Sunday Sit Downs, the show where anything goes and nothing is left behind. As always, I am Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome, and I don't think you guys understand how excited I am for today's show because this could possibly be one of the most important ones. Not saying that the one that I had on free speech with was important because it was, but we have to keep that momentum going because conversations need to be had and common ground needs to be reached within these times. So today we're going to be talking about a very important topic, and it couldn't be a more appropriate time because this happens to be Pride Month. However, I still believe that you should take pride in who you are every single day of the year, especially when you wake up in the morning, because you should be thankful to be who you are and to be alive. And today we're going to be talking about identity politics in entertainment. And the person that I have asked to join me today is someone who is absolutely perfect for this. I discovered her channel when she was just talking about her attitude towards BookTube and not holding anything back. And I said to myself, this person's got something special here. This is a good voice that needs to be heard. And we started talking and we started having amazing conversations. And we are both on opposite sides of the spectrum. She leans more towards the left, and I'm a former liberal turned conservative. And even though she and I are on opposite sides of the spectrum, we always manage to have amazing, rational conversations. We don't walk away wanting to kill each other. We do agree to disagree sometime, but we always manage to find some common ground. And that is my friend Johanna from Joe the Great. Johanna, good morning, and thank you for coming on to the show today.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever the hell you are. It's actually afternoon. I just realized that. All right, and we've already got the comments going. So let me just say hello to everybody. So I'm really excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to this forever. So it's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I don't think we planned enough. We had way too many private talks where we were actually making sure that we knew exactly what we were doing, because one of the more important things is we don't want to walk away from this with crazies coming at us saying you got everything wrong. Like, we wanted to make sure that we knew what we were talking about today, and that couldn't be more important.
Yeah, and I think it helps too because it makes the conversation a lot more organic, a lot more genuine, and I think that's something I value in my videos, and you obviously value in your videos too. So it's going to be interesting. We'll see what happens.
Absolutely. So, as someone who loves talking about entertainment and popular culture, I wanted to really go at that angle from the identity politics perspective because it's happening a lot now, especially with some movies that have been coming out, which we will touch upon briefly, probably towards the end of the show. But let's begin with the questions because we only have an hour and a great deal to discuss, as we always do.
Mm-hmm.
So the first question that I wanted to ask you was, when did the concept of identity politics find you? And what was your first perceptions towards it?
Well, I always thought that identity politics was when you just proclaim yourself as something. But I didn't actually really understand what it meant until I think when I got to school. And it started to, because for those guys who don't know, I'm an English major, minoring in history, and I'm finishing up my degree, and I'm actually going to I'm getting into grad school now. But we started to learn a lot more about human relations and politics, not necessarily the politics that we think of it, but politics in the way we deal with everyday people. And identity politics really leans on how we gravitate towards people that we are like-minded like us in terms of our identity, like whether it's racial or religious or anything like that. So when I started to really understand identity politics, it was really in school and in discourse and in reading different theorists that it actually came to me. So it wasn't actually an entertainment.
Right. Yeah. You see, I am exactly the opposite. Even though I was always growing up and always understanding that your identity is a very important thing, and that's from someone who came from the Jewish faith, as someone who went to a private Jewish school. understood the Jewish family values. So that was something that was always in my head. But one of the few things that my parents always said to me was, it's important to know who you are, but you also have to know that you are a functioning member of society. So you also have to embrace yourself as a United States citizen and as a person in general, and do unto others as you would want done unto you. But identity politics, especially, was something that came into my mind specifically with entertainment. And it happened on YouTube when people were starting to make videos about diversity, and especially with the Black Lives Matter movement starting to spring up in television news, et cetera, as well as the gay rights activism. And it started, even though I knew that these were things that had been around for a very, very long time, the voices were starting to get much, much louder. And the thing that was really starting to hit home for me was the fact that all of a sudden, people who were straight and white and predominantly male, even if these were people that didn't do anything wrong, were suddenly getting attacked and being called racist, misogynist, homophobe, what have you. And lo and behold, it all resulted in the electing of President Trump. So it's something that has still lingered right now, and we're now seeing this even more so in film. We're seeing it more so in books and stuff like that, and in television. And I just feel that with this conversation, not saying that it's a bad thing, it's something that people need to have rational discussions about, and that's where it all came into fruition with me.
Okay.
So the second question that I want to ask you was, when it comes to identity politics, the big topic at hand is usually diversity. It's the major talking point almost all the time, especially when it comes to people's books that they read and television shows that they watch, etc. But my question is, because of the fact that there has been rational discussion, but at the same time there has been extreme irrational discussion from both sides, I personally feel that identity politics has taken a very unusual shape. And my question is, do you agree that it's happening, and do you agree with the direction that it is taking?
Wow, that is such a complex question. We only have
Well, it's a complex topic.
Yeah, I could write a whole grad dissertation on that. To be honest with you, that's a difficult question, because I think that the movement toward having more people of color telling more stories, having more of a, I guess, a spectrum in terms of the type of movies coming out. You had like movies like Moonlight, and you have great movies like Call Me by Your Name. And so you have a lot of these very different storylines where, you have people that are from color or LGBT community or anything like that is coming out. But I would say that the negative turn about this is the fact that for a lot of these movies, there are some movies where I've noticed that they're independent and they're great because they're about these very organic, small, very manipulated stories that are well told. But then you have a lot of these blockbuster films that are trying so hard to go on the identity politics train and push a lot of people of color into these characters. Instead of making authentic characters and make them believable, they're just pushing, these generic default characters and putting a person of color in that. To me, when I saw Star Wars The Force Awakens, I thought that John Boyega, character was an example of this. You see this in a lot of YA novels where I feel like they push people of color into these characters, but it's not like these are authentic people of color with cultures and backgrounds and actual like familial roots to them, but they're rather just default characters of what they would perceive someone of, I guess typically what you would see as like a white character, and then pushing a person of color in that. But what people don't tend to understand is when you have a person of color, they have a background, they have a family, they have a culture, they have a language, and that in itself makes them unique. And if you want to promote more people of color, that's what you should keep into consideration. And I see that in a lot of films now, and it does ruin the authenticity of the film, which again, and I think A Wrinkle in Time will be another good example of that tried to do it and failed at some point in that regard. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, as a matter of fact, I'm so glad that you gave certain examples, and I agree with you in terms of the independent films. And that's because of the fact that when it comes to movies, it's about how much money can I make? And people also need to understand that we are living in a society where not everything is for everybody. That's just the way that it is. That's just the way of things. But an independent film is one where people can really connect with certain characters because usually, like you said, Moonlight is a perfect example about a Black gay man who starts out as a child, etc., etc. And that's something that exists in this world, and it's a very well done film. It's a very unique film as well. And a movie like that would not do well it's not even classified as a blockbuster, so it's never going to make that kind of money. Because when it comes to the movies that make the most money, it's those generic stories with not too much character development, but that's because of the fact that those movies are not supposed to have that.
Yeah.
Television shows, on the other hand, get it right because television shows have seasons and there's a lot more to work with. Perfect examples, even though I am not really connected to the stories much, are the DCCW shows. There's a lot of persons of color and minority groups. There's a lot of LGBTQ people in there. But what they do is they don't feed to the stereotypes. They actually give these people a character. They give these people a backstory. And they're basically saying that these are people. They're not gay people. They're not white people. They're not Black people. They're not Asian people. They're people. And they're just like you and me. Everything else about them is secondary. And when you do something like that, you get a positive attitude, a long-lasting good feeling, because it's just people being people regardless of what they look like and what their orientation is. And that's what I feel is something that needs to catch on more. The fact that tokenism is the predominant thing in regards to a big blockbuster. I think an example there was a lot of people knocked Avengers Infinity War, which is now the 4th highest grossing film in the USA to date. The LGBT radicals came out and said there's no gay people in this. And I'm just like, the movie is not about who's gay and who's not. The point of this movie is to prevent Thanos from getting all the Infinity Stones and killing everybody. That's what people need to understand. And that's my attitude towards it. I feel that we need to let people understand that the people can be in these movies. It doesn't matter. But you have to understand that there are times when you can elaborate on who they are, and there are times that you can't. So don't be upset if they don't. That's what I would say. You know, they're going to be there. If they're there, if they don't fit the stereotype, if they do fit the stereotype, unfortunately, with a 2-hour movie, you really don't have much time to do that unless the story revolves around that specific matter. Case in point, Love, Simon.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. Completely right. I can't even add to that because I stand completely behind you. I think that also there is this, the reason why people ask so much about representation, especially in movies and in TV shows, is because there was a lack of beforehand. But now you have this wide array of people that are making films with their iPhones, and you have so many different medias and platforms where you have representation. If you actively search for it, it's out there. That's another point too that I will drive. I'll be very brief about it. I did talk about it in my video, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But if there are representation out there. There are books, there are films made by people that are LGBTQ, that are people of color, that are foreign films. There are so many things out there, guys. The only option is not it's not the only American cinema. It's not only like the blockbuster films. If you're crying for representation in that, then I don't think you really know what you're asking for, because what we should really be doing is giving our attention and giving our support to if you really want to give your support to LGBTQ or people of color or people from minority groups, then actively look out for medias, look out for books that are written by these people, that are people like us that are talking about these kind of topics. If you want to support people like us that are actively talking about it, come to our channels and watch our videos and give feedback and give support, because we're out there. There's no, I think, going to the one person that you're favor of and asking them so much, like that Sarah J. Maas thing that happened, I think
that was devastating. That was horrible.
Devastating. Like, if she's writing a book, I'm a writer myself. I'm writing a book to write a book. I'm not writing a book to make everyone happy. If you don't see someone that you want to see in my book, then guess what? The story might not be that good. It's either the story's not that good, or I don't know what you were expecting when you were coming into this novel. You came into the novel to read it. You read it as it is. Now, if you're asking for something, if you want to see more people with LGBTQ, look for those books. There's hundreds of books out there written about that. If you're looking for written by person of color, there's hundreds of books written about that. Movies are the same way. So I would definitely say, if you're looking for representation, it's out there. You just need to find it.
And off topic, I also want to say there's no reason why you can't give in to the tokenism every now and again and laugh at yourself. When you see those spoof movies like Scary Movie and stuff like that, people welcome the tokenism. I mean, I still remember that when I went to see the first Scary Movie, there was a lot of white and a lot of black people in the theaters, and everybody was having a good time, even though people's stereotypes are being made fun of, because sometimes you just want it because you just want to have a good time and just forget about life for a while. And there's nothing wrong with having a sense of humor, which I feel is extremely lacking these days. But I mean, that's just the way it is. I agree with you 100% with everything that you said. And yes, there are so many YouTubers out there specifically that are talking about all these kinds of diverse books. I mean, also, some of the most diverse things that are out there right now are the things you don't even realize that are so diverse because you're so enveloped in the story. Case in point, Westworld.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love Westworld. It
is such a diverse cast, but nobody realizes it because you're just enveloped in the characters and not in the identities of the characters. And that's what makes that show so infectiously brilliant. So let's move into the third question. And that is, along with all of the other outlying forces such as politics and social issues, do you feel comfortable with the fact that the entertainment industry is allowing identity politics to be used as a platform? Because I could give you my attitude on it, but I would like to see your take on it first.
To be honest with you, Hollywood has always been this thing of like riding the trend train. It's not necessarily new. I mean, I love Golden Age cinema. Like, I will watch Cary Grant and Humphrey Bogart and Audrey Hepburn all day. But at that time, the films that were coming out were World War II films and romantic films and musicals to kind of get people off of the fact of, you know, there's a war going on, or the Cold War, or like all these different things that were happening at the time period to get people kind of an escapism, if you will. And that was the trend at that time. The trend of now is this hyper tense political climate that we have, where you do have people that are worried about sometimes, especially if you're a person of color and you have this rise of extremism and you do have this rise of people that are white supremacist. And it's just very tense right now, because I think there's this hyper alert of, I think in America that always has been. I don't think it's ever stopped being that way, but I think
agree.
Right now,
I do agree.
Yeah, I think it's always been that way, but it's just that there's just this microcosm of like, oh my gosh, like we're hyper aware of this now because we've been asleep for so long, which is, I think, the reason why woke became a thing.
Yeah, that I don't go along with the whole woke
Yeah,
thing.
I don't
And I
either.
don't think it's an identity thing. I think it's just a human thing because we've always been told, don't talk to strangers, don't go somewhere by yourself, don't walk so late at night by yourself unless you're with a whole group of people. I think it's because of the fact that it was more, I mean, this could cause some issues with people. I really hope it doesn't. I think it's because of the fact that we have loving parents who just don't want to lose their child, so they've instilled fear in us
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because they want us to be responsible and safe. And I think because of the fact that we hold those thoughts and those ideas based on things that we were taught as young children, that with the political climate, as you said, I think it's just mutated into something that we have today.
Exactly. And now that people are becoming so aware, because I mean, I've always been aware because I'm a Black woman. Like, I don't think I could ever like not be aware. But it does, in terms of whether I agree with it or not, it's some great films have come out of this climate, but I would definitely say that I tend to, at least personally, gravitate towards films that kind of make me escape from it for a while. Like, I loved Shape of Water. As politically aware as it was still a very much escapist film because it had a lot of these homages to the old Hollywood that I fell in love with.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yes, I mean, I remember in film class, where this girl made a comment and she's like, you realize that you watch a lot of films with a lot of white people in it, right? And I'm like,
oh, God forbid. Oh, God forbid.
and I'm just like, yeah, I mean, it was the golden age. I mean, you did have like certain films where you had Sidney Poitier and Dorothy Dandridge, and like those were great films too. But majority of the films that took on in that period were with white people because there was this segregation in terms of films that were being made. And so I loved that Guillermo del Toro really like paid homage to that, and him as a man of color paying homage to the golden age. I felt nostalgic. So I tend to gravitate towards films and shows that tend to keep me out of my element, but still have that self-awareness of being political, if that makes any sense. Like Mad Men or Westworld even sometimes. I tried to get into The Handmaid's Tale, but it's too on the nose for me. I can't get into the second season. I heard it gets better, so I'm still trying to get into that. Yeah,
that's
but just
kind of funny because I've heard that The Handmaid's Tale got worse because a lot of people say now that it's officially going outside of the pages of the book, they don't know what to do with it. But that's just what I've heard.
Oh, I haven't even finished watching it.
No, it's like you're absolutely right. It's like one of my favorite films of all time is Beverly Hills Cop starring Eddie Murphy. The main character happens to be a Black guy. Does that mean that I'm not allowed to see that movie because I'm white? And I mean, like, even though I'm a white guy, I was always afraid of going places for myself because I'm 5'4". I'm looked at as a very vulnerable person. I could be beat up by a whole bunch of tall 6'5" white guys or Black guys or Hispanic guys because I look so vulnerable. So I don't think the color of my skin really is a concern of mine in terms of my own personal safety. I think it's a little bit different than that because of what I look like in terms of my height. But at the same time, it's like I just want, because I love the fact that there are so many people that are saying like, oh, the most important movie, it's like one of these things is going to come out because the book is The Hate You Give. I'm like, I'm sorry, did you ever see In the Heat of the Night, which I just finally saw for the first time, and it is a brilliant film. Did you ever see Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which involves race relations? Yes. There are so many films, especially when the 60s happened, because the 60s was a revolutionary time for film. Mm-hmm. Because that was when we really started seeing like interracial couples, people who in fact were homosexual, like in 1969's Midnight Cowboy. And because of the fact that that movie was what it was, that was a rated X film and it won Best Picture. There's nothing crazy controversial in it. It was just because of the fact that a male prostitute, and a character played by Dustin Hoffman who was gay. And that's what was so interesting to me. But it's like, if you're going to yell at someone because one of their favorite films is 12 Angry Men because it's just a bunch of white people, like, I pity you if that's your attitude. It's not about that. It's about the stories.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. I personally, as a writer, there are so many films that I love. There's so many actors that I love for their work. A lot of them do tend to, it took a long time for me to start watching films with from people of color because I got so used to watching films made by white men and featuring white men and white women. And so there's definitely something to be said about that in terms of representation. But I had to actively look for representation of Black filmmakers and Black actors and stuff like that that weren't Tyler Perry because I can't stand Tyler Perry. Or
Yeah,
yeah,
he's one of the he listen,
so
I
hard.
actually like him as an actor, though. I think he's a good actor because I loved him in Gone Girl with Ben Affleck. I loved him in that movie. But
Yeah,
yeah, he makes those movies for the sake of, like I said earlier, like he just wants to give into the stereotypes, give you an outrageous comedy. But I will always say to people, you should see, even I don't know what your attitude towards Spike Lee is, but Do the Right Thing is one of the greatest films ever made, period. Such a fantastic film about race relations and just perceptions of people who are not like you. It's a wonderful film. It was way ahead of its time
oh
and
yeah.
so powerful. I love it. I
It
love
took
that
me a
one
long
so
time
much.
to get used to Spike Lee because I was so used to watching certain kind of films where they were very romanticized and easy to watch and kind of like very fluid. But Spike Lee is very much about like getting to the core of things and like rubbing the knuckles a little bit. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
definitely.
I appreciate all kinds of directors that are willing to push that bar. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But they're out there. You have to look for it. That's the big.
Exactly. And that's
Mhm.
why I praise the YouTube community, because there are so many people in the film critics community who have opened my eyes to films that I didn't even know existed. And that's one of the greatest things that that YouTube has to offer. It's a blessing. So before we get into the last four questions, I just want to let people know, as always, thank you so much for joining us. There are some people here that I have never seen in the chat before. We've got Shan from Secondhand Shan. Thank you so much for coming. I see Britt. I see Devin. Always great to see the regulars. And someone who just started following me on Twitter, Books of a Feather, welcome. I love what you're saying in the chat. I really do. And just know, as always, everybody, this video will go down in a couple of hours so I can add a nice intro and outro, and it will go up on my channel again on Monday around 7 a.m. So let's get back to the questions, and this is the question that I think will take up most of our time because I think
Oh,
it's one
goodness.
of the better questions.
Okay.
Let's look at this from the other side.
Hmm.
There are white people that are very accepting of diversity.
Hmm.
But of course, at the same time, there are some people that are rejecting it. But
Hmm.
I don't necessarily believe that it's about the fact that they don't want a person of color or a gay person in their film. I think that what it is there's a lot of people that are saying that whites don't have a culture. We need fewer white people in film or in literature.
Hmm.
Basically, there's a broad brush that is starting to be used on the white skin color in general.
Hmm.
People that have my skin color are looked upon by not everybody, but these extremists as monsters.
Hmm.
And yes, there are some that
Hmm.
exist on the white side, on the minority side.
Hmm.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
But my question that I feel that I want to ask you is, should white creators be bullied into not progressing? And do you feel that these labels that are now being formed, because I'm going to say something very controversial right now.
Hmm.
Racism exists everywhere, regardless of your skin color. And I seriously believe that these specific things that I'm saying are examples of that. Like, I personally feel that if someone ever walked up to me and said, "Hey, white boy," I would take offense to that tremendously, because I've never done anything to hurt anybody, regardless of who you are or where you come from. And that's kind of what I want to lead into right now with this.
Okay. Wow, that's a really loaded question. Um, I'm gonna to answer the first part of the question, painting any group, any racial group with a broad brush is in itself a bad thing to do. We tend to do it because most of the time it's from lack of exposure and ignorance. Um, I'm very much aware that there are a lot of different groups within the white race. even if you look in Europe, for instance, historically, European countries that are considered white, like Spain and Portugal, are seen as less than people from France and Britain and Belgium because they were closer to the equator, and so they tended to be a little darker, even though they were white. But they were still this kind of inequality in terms of that. So even if that can be an example, that I feel like that is an example of even disparities within a racial group. Even in the white racial group, you have different groups of ethnicities. You have Irish people that were considered less than, you have Italians that were considered less than, you have even European Jews that were considered less than even in their own countries, let alone in other places. And so there's definitely that. And I think that painting a broad brush and saying that there is no culture is basically just reverse psychology of the very thing that has been done historically from minority groups, from majority white race to minority groups. It's the reversal effect. And I think that does not help the situation. I think that if we are really to promote tolerance and promote understanding, is to educate ourselves and be more exposed and to open ourselves up to other cultures that are outside of our own. I completely agree with that. Like, that is my take on it.
It's a great take.
Yeah, and so I've been but it's such a loaded question.
Yeah, and well, if I could just cut you off for just a quick second, I mean, it's also really funny how perceptions and broad brushes painted are even over the stupidest things. Like, seriously, go to Boston with a Yankee hat on and watch what happens. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. I remember when I was in an elevator once with a bunch of Jewish kids from Baltimore. And I told them that I was a Jewish kid from New York, and they all looked at me and said, "Oh, you're not a Yankee fan, are you?" Like, that's the example that I'm trying to prove. It's like, it's gotten to the point where it's hilarious how everybody is stereotyped, even for some of the most asinine of reasons.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like, New Yorkers think lesser of people from LA. Northerners in the United States look at people less than people from Texas. People who live in a city think lesser of someone who's a country bumpkin.
Exactly. I completely agree. And to be honest with you, it's even done across the board. Like, for people that are Black, we're all like labeled under this one thing of African American. But I'm first generation born in this country. My parents are Haitian. Like, I'm Haitian American, and Haitians are so different from African Americans, and we're also extremely different from Jamaicans and Cubans and Puerto Ricans and Trinidadians. Like, it's just, we're so different. But again, if I walk into a place and they see I'm a Black woman, they're going to paint me in a certain way because that's a perception, that's a stereotype. And I'm not to say, and this is what I personally believe, I don't think stereotypes are all that bad. Now, it's bad if you use it in a way where you're discriminating against and you're isolating someone, yes. But stereotypes sometimes, if you're not exposed to the culture, if you're not around people of a certain racial group, stereotypes are all you have. Therefore, I think that's the reason why there is this perception of white people don't have a culture. The same way that Black people are ghetto or ratchet or whatever you want to call it, even though that is so problematic on so many levels and so discriminatory, but we're not going to go into that.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I've always never understood how when a Black person actually becomes extremely successful, how they are perceived by people as an Uncle Tom sometimes. Like, that just really gets under my skin because they basically say you're trying to be like a white person. I'm like, how dare you?
Yeah.
What's wrong with someone being successful, regardless?
Yeah. Or someone that sounds like me. Like, I speak very clearly. I do have certain tastes that are very much Western. I'm not going to lie. But that is because again, my parents are Haitian, which was a French colony. So we're very much influenced by the French Western way of things, but we're still very much in tune with our Haitian roots. But again, it's painting that broad brush of the way I'm acting. Someone will say like, "Oh, you're ashamed to be Black because you sound the way you do, or you like certain things." You get what I'm saying? So there's that perception of people doing that when they don't understand individuality. And I think that's one of the biggest points I want to drive about this question, is that there needs to be an understanding that identity is just a way that you politically identify with a group or identify with a racial background or whatever it is in terms of organization for society. But you have to, as a human being, have to understand that there's individuals with their own family background, with their own, you get what I'm saying? We're going back to this idea of the individual. And I think there needs to be this deeper understanding of that people are the way they are because of their background, because of their experiences, because of who they are as a human being and their character. All that comes into play. And so you cannot, that's why it's so problematic to paint with a broad brush.
Yeah, so, I understand. I understand that. I preach about individuality all the time. It's the individuality of a person that makes us all relevant. It gives us a striving to perfect ourselves.
Yeah. So I hope that answered your question. I feel like that pretty much
did. I think it did. It was wonderful. I really appreciate that. And I mean, it's like, if I was a person who truly was that stereotypical white person that is apparently predominant in the mainstream media these days, I wouldn't have somebody like you on my show talking to me. Let's just basically let's get the logic out there. That's one of the few things that I always say. You hit these whack jobs on either side with logic, and they'll have seizures. They have no idea how to counter logic. And that's one of the few weapons that people like us really need to carry in our back pockets, because they need to see the bigger picture and they need to go past this jargon that is not necessarily untrue, because what is it that they always say? With every untruth or with whatever joke is said, there's always a little bit of fact thrown in there.
Yeah.
But they got to stop twisting that truth. That's the way that I would say it. So anyway, I mean, like, a perfect example that I was telling you earlier was Quentin Tarantino just recently announced his cast for his brand new film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is all about the Manson family. And they showed a picture of the cast, and all of a sudden there were a bunch of extremists on the left that are basically already planning to boycott this movie because there's no black person in this film. And they're already labeling Quentin Tarantino as a racist. And I'm like saying to myself, who are you? Because Samuel L. Jackson would not be a household name if it wasn't for Quentin Tarantino. You know, he gave us this amazing BMF. That's what he calls himself, the BMF, the bad motherfucker. That's Samuel L. Jackson. Everybody knows him as that. He's got those letters on his Star Wars lightsaber from the prequels. So it's like, I don't understand how people can judge somebody so quickly just because of something like that. Because when we're referring to identity politics, entertainment, and meanwhile, Clifton Collins Jr., who happens to be Hispanic, is actually in that movie, and nobody realizes that. That's the part that's just blowing my mind. Because if you don't know your history about the Manson family, this was actually something that didn't affect the black community in America. This actually was something that affected the white community. I'm pretty certain that there will be other kinds of people in that movie, but don't jump to conclusions, because I guarantee you that is not Tarantino's intention. He was not intending to do something like that. I mean, nobody complained about Inglourious Bastards, and that's a movie that had no person of color.
Yeah. And I think also it depends on, I think it also depends on the narrative, because in terms of Inglourious Bastards, yeah, it dealt with like Europeans and like, I get like Jews, but then again, a lot of people don't know that in the Holocaust there was also many other victims. In turn, like you had gypsies, you had Romanians, you had people,
you had handicapped people, you had gay people,
you had the Rhineland children that were all people of color that were massacred by the Nazis. Yeah. And so it was just like, those were, and communists as well. Those are all like, it's funny because sometimes I feel like we're asking for the wrong things and we're arguing about the wrong things. Chris Rock made a joke. I remember in the not the Grammys, the Oscars a few years ago, where he was like, I'm trying to remember what the joke was. He was saying that, it's people were complaining about that there's not enough, people of color in the Oscars, and they're not nominated, and they're not giving equal opportunity. And he was arguing for the right things, but he did it in the framework of like, people were asking, when Sidney Poitier won every other year, and he was saying that, how can we ask for Black people who would win cinematography when we're too busy wondering about our grandma, like I think something about our grandmother swinging on a tree, basically saying that the very real issues that were impacting the Black community was not Hollywood films. It was not worrying about representation. It was worrying about real things that impacted everyday life. And I think that in a lot of ways, people like to argue about things that are superficial and not get to the real deep root of the problem. At the end of the day, yes, there should be more opportunities for people of color. And there is. Like, there's more films where they're being featured. It's happening. It's a slow process. Slavery was a thing only less than 200 years ago, guys. It's a thing. So we have to, if we want the change that we want, yes, we have to actively make projects and advocate for them and support them. Again, find that representation out there. But going and complaining about a Quentin Tarantino not featuring a Black guy in his film, come on. Like, that's not, and even then it's like, why is that the one thing that people want to argue about when there's so many other things? Again, if you want to see change, actively make it. If you want to see representation in a movie or in a book or whatever, and you don't see it out there, and you really look and you don't find it out there, create it yourself. Make that representation for yourself and make that platform, because we could now. We can. Yeah. You get what I'm saying? It's one of those things.
I do.
Why argue about it? It's so stupid. It's I'm sorry, like, if that's controversial, I guess, but
it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. I mean, I remember when the whole Oscars so white thing happened, and I remembered, as someone who goes to so many movies, I'm like, I remember that specific year. I was like, where was that movie that featured a very strong performance of a person of color? And I was just like saying to myself, I don't recall one. Like, am I seriously going to force them to nominate Denzel Washington for The Equalizer? That's not an Oscar-worthy performance. I mean, listen, before we get into the next question, here's my issue. It's not hashtag Oscars so white. It's not hashtag Oscars so male. It's Oscars so Streep. Stop giving Meryl Streep Oscar nominations just because she's Meryl Streep.
You always find a way to just down on Meryl Streep, man.
I'm sorry. When she won the Academy Award for The Iron Lady and it wasn't given to Viola Davis for The Help, I was furious, because Viola Davis was the best performance for a woman that year.
Yeah.
She is one of the best actresses that I know. She is one of the main reasons why I love Suicide Squad. She is the greatest Amanda Waller, next to the voice of CCH Pounder. But anyway, let's get into the first question.
There you go. That's a great answer to the question. There you go.
There you go. Yep. Do you feel that, what are some of the better ways to provide the right solutions for representation in entertainment? And do you feel that all entertainment should depict reality? Because one of the major things that comes into this whole thing is whitewashing,
Okay, so
you've already touched upon it a little bit.
We touched upon it a lot, actually, in this video. I would definitely say that I personally don't think. I think that's a hard one. I'm trying to find a good way to phrase this. Whitewashing is something that I think doesn't necessarily exist, because I think cinema has always been in the hands of white men. And so I feel like, because that is the fact, and minorities have always been we have a constitution that originally was drafted with us not in mind. And
that's also true.
Yeah, and we have to actively fight for our freedom and our liberties and their rights. And even then, it's still a struggle to keep those rights in an everyday basis. And so therefore, I feel like we're slowly but surely, I think it's the adverse effect. I think that secretly we are colorizing I like to use that word, colorizing Hollywood. And I think in a way that's great, because in a way that it's creating opportunities for people of color, it's creating opportunities for other kind of people, for people across the board, and even people not even, and not just racially identified or sexually identified, but it could be people that identify themselves as gender fluid or whatever it is. So I feel like slowly but surely we're doing that. And I think that we're definitely in the right direction, because you have a lot of shows, like right now I'm getting into a show called Pose, where it's about in the 80s, the transgender community and the gay LGBT community in New York. And it is an incredible TV show. If you have not watched, I highly suggest you do. It's on FX. It's a great TV show, and it features the first 3 transgender actresses. Amazing, amazing performances. And Evan Peters is in it as well. But I feel, yeah, it's an amazing show. But I feel like we're doing that. We're slowly making, I think, in terms of entertainment, we're making it more how we wanted it, and reflect more on what I think what United States is, I guess, like bringing kind of widening the periphery of the narrative to include everyone, rather than just the small group that it was considered for the time. And I think that we're heading in that direction.
But okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know there was a but. My apologies.
Yeah, but there's a but there. I think that it's becoming less about the art.
I agree.
Talking as a writer, I love storytelling. I absolutely love it. I love films for their cinematography, the music, like just all the layers to it. I sometimes want to lose myself in the art, to separate myself from the reality, and I want to enjoy it. Not necessarily meaning that the story has to be how all movies were back then. I'm not saying for us to go back to how it was back then. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that I want to go back to the art of the thing. I want to go back to really evaluating how great a movie is by its direction, by the actors, by all the layers of what makes the movie great, rather than the superficiality of what the representation is. Because I feel like there is this, we're losing the essence of what actually makes a great film. And I think that, or what makes a great show, or what makes a great piece, even books. More authors now, especially in YA, and I down on a YA all the time, because to me YA lacks a lot. It lacks a lot, and it's very misleading. It romanticizes mental illness and all this stuff. I'm not going to go into it, but there's a lot of problems that I have with YA. But one of the biggest problems I have is the fact that it sprinkles representation all the time, and the story itself is not a good story.
Right.
Because it makes it more about making a political statement and marketing to that identity politics that we have now, because they're more focused on making money rather than actually telling a great story. And that wanes on the story. And that's what's happening in media now. And that's the thing that I cannot stand. And that's something that is a problem. It's a huge problem. Like, I watched Call Me by Your Name, and that movie gave me goosebumps. Like, it was just such a beautiful film. And I'm reading the book now, and I'm just enveloped. And these are about 2 Jewish gay men, and it's incredible. Like, it's such a beautiful story. It's just so romantic and gorgeous, and I could get lost in their love story. And I'm not a gay man. I don't know how that actual experience is, but I can enjoy it. And that's one of the great things about art. You see what I'm saying?
It's a rich story.
Exactly. And the representation's there, but he didn't lose the essence of the story and the setting and the music. And it's just a great film. And Timothy Chalamet is just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, my attitude is, like, I always say that when it comes to characters in a story, the example that I want to bring, and as a matter of fact, we sort of roped this into the 6th question. And
really?
The 6th question is, how have we gotten this right, and how have we gotten it wrong? And we'll elaborate a little bit more on it, but we do have 10 minutes left, so I'm hoping that we can cram it all in with one more question. But my attitude is, if you read a book and you don't get a clear depiction of the representation, then it's an open canvas. Case in point, the HBO version of Fahrenheit 451. Guy Montag is never described as a white man or a black man or a Hispanic man. So what did HBO do? Let's cast a great actor. And they gave us Michael B. Jordan. I was like, awesome. I love Michael B. Jordan. Great choice of actor. And not just that, you also get Michael Shannon as well, who's another fantastic actor. You saw The Shape of Water. You know what
he's like. He's amazing. I love him.
But I feel that when it comes to things that we've gotten right and things that we've gotten wrong, one of the things that I do not appreciate is the virtue signaling. That's number one. And I also don't appreciate the fact that in order to get representation, we have to take all of these old movies and we have to redo them in a different way with an all-female cast or an all-person of color cast. Case in point, let me say this. I welcomed Ghostbusters. Okay, I thought that the cast was beautiful. I loved it. But why couldn't it have been Ghostbusters 3? You know, why do they have to reinvent the wheel and not just give us a sequel? Ocean's 8. There are people that love it and there are people that hate it. But what I appreciate about it, even though I haven't seen it yet, is that it is a continuation of the Ocean story. I didn't see it because I just don't care for those movies. But I would like to see that movie eventually because the cast looks fantastic.
Yeah.
But I feel that you don't need to do that. I think the problem we're lacking right here is originality. We're losing the original story and the fact that everything has to be redone because if it's an all-white cast, it's wrong. You know, I never appreciated that. And other examples that I could give you are the live-action film A Ghost in the Shell starring Scarlett Johansson. There was an outrage because of the fact that her character was not Asian. But the original writers of A Ghost in the Shell, the graphic novel, the manga novel, and the 1995 film casted Scarlett Johansson. They said, please cast her. She is wonderful because this character is supposed to be based on a European body. So the android was supposed to be a white girl. So that's one of the few things. I thought that The Last Jedi was okay. My attitude is, as much as I appreciate strong women in a film, I don't like the fact that in order for strong women to be represented, men have to be looked at as second class and weak and dumb and foppish. Like, I don't appreciate that. Why can't there just be equality in all of these films with all of these great actors? It's like I say, we bring up a movie like Black Panther. Okay, you were not going to get a predominantly white cast in that movie. But do you know how many white people filled those movie theaters to see that movie? Because it was a fantastic film.
Yeah. And marketed well.
But I will always tell people that I still don't think that it's the best Marvel movie. And I can prove that because just yesterday I rewatched Captain America, The Winter Soldier. And I think that that is still the best Marvel film. It is just a beautifully... It is a beautifully written character development, don't trust anybody kind of film. I loved that movie so much. And even though Infinity War starred everybody and their mother, and it is one of the highest grossing films in all of history right now, I still think that Winter Soldier is better.
Yeah, Black Panther... I really loved Black Panther. I loved that all the elements that it put in it. And I love that it was this kind of like fighting of ideologies of like Garvey and I'm trying to remember the other, I think it's Booker T. Yeah, it's like the two different ideologies of whether Blacks should be isolationist and independent and we should like strive to make our own community in the United States and be completely separate, or go back to Africa and have our own kind of like, I guess, idea like Wakanda, if you want. There's that ideology, but then there's the ideology of like, let's try to get rights and let's try to live equal and stuff like that. And I like that, and let's try to share our culture and our expertise with the world. So you had this battling of the two ideologies, and I like that it was impersonated in Killmonger and in T'Challa. It was very, very interesting. I thought that was really well done. It's definitely the most politically charged, I think, Marvel film. Out of all of them, it's definitely a lot more politically charged. Winter Soldier was great, though. But
the politics was done very, very well in good taste in Black
exactly.
Panther.
That's why I loved it. And again, the politics mixed really well with the art of the thing. You get what I'm saying? So it was great movie.
The story really was the driving point, and the politics were interwoven into the story, but the story was still the main focus.
That's why I loved Black Panther, because it was a great film in itself. Like when you look at it by itself, it's a great film, and you can watch it at any point, and it's still very poignant. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but to go back to your question, I'm sorry. What was the original question?
Well, the original question was, because I think I also answered it a little bit myself, was how do
Yeah.
you think we got it right and how do you think we got it wrong? I think that Black Panther was a perfect example of how we got it right.
Oh yeah,
And
definitely.
we touched upon A Wrinkle in Time, where I feel that Ava DuVernay got it wrong because she sacrificed a massive chunk of the book, which was important plot points. But
Yeah.
she's basically saying, just come to my movie. Because that's one of the funniest things. On the news, all the news talked about was how diverse the cast was. They didn't talk about if the movie was good or not.
Exactly. That was the issue. And having like an interracial family and everything, that was a really cool dynamic. And I think that was definitely a highlight of the film. But again, what does it really matter if the story's bad? Like if it doesn't really matter if it's not really driving a point. I personally liked A Wrinkle in Time. It wasn't that bad, but then it like to me, but then again, I have the book. I have not read the book yet. So I feel like once I read the book, I'm gonna have a whole different kind of perception of that movie. I still want to support Ava DuVernay, and I still want to, because apparently I heard her work is incredible, and I have not seen all her work. I've only seen Selma, and I loved Selma. So it just, again, I want to put my support in the artist and in the work that they do. I don't want to make it about racial, like I don't want to play into the identity politics of like, okay, this is a person of color, I have to support them, because I don't have to support Tyler Perry if I don't think his films are good. I'm not going to pay for a Tyler Perry film, and I refuse to give support to him because I think that he continues to perpetuate and not break out of the mold of Black stereotypes. And he has the platform now where he can really make films about different kind of Black people and showing different kind of Black experiences rather than the generic stereotypes of what people already think about Black people. And he's playing on it, even if it's for humor, like humor's effect. But I'm not going to support him. So no matter what, you're going to have the right and the wrong ways that people do things. It just depends on you as the viewer, and me and anyone that's watching it, if you choose to support that or not. It's the same thing. Like I really love Woody Allen films, and I know that that's extremely problematic because of the Me Too movement and everything like that. But
separate the art from the artist. You gotta separate the art from the artist there.
I personally support the art. I personally separate the artist from the work from the artist, because I don't want someone to pick up my book and read my book and judge me as an individual because of. You get what I'm saying? Because
I do entirely. I just don't like Woody Allen in general. I just never liked the guy. He stole the best picture in 1977 from Star Wars. End of story. But I don't appreciate, like, speaking of Star Wars, I had no issue with Lando being portrayed as a pansexual character. My issue was the fact that Lucasfilm got on their soapbox and said, come see our movie, we have a pansexual character, come see it regardless if our movie is good or absolute crap because we have a pansexual character. I don't appreciate that. But anyway, we have one more question and we're down to the last 2 minutes, and my question is, I think we can answer it quickly. Do you think that we will be able to find a perfect balance in terms of all of these things that we discussed in entertainment? Like, will we ever truly find our common ground? I think that we can.
I personally don't think so, because I feel like I don't think so, because I feel like everyone is looking for something different. I personally would like to see more representation of different kind of Black films. Like coming from an coming from an island background, I would love to see more films where there's more island Black Caribbean representation. But then again, I'm making my own projects where I do that. So even if it's not out there, I'm actively going to make it, and I do
taking the initiative.
Yeah, and in the future, I do plan on being part of creating films and creating projects, and not only doing writing, but also doing cinema work where I can do these kind of films. And if people like it, great, and they want to come behind me and support me, that's great. If they don't, that's okay too. But at the end of the day, I'm making the platform where I'm going to be featuring people of island, people in my work, people with backgrounds that they don't really see in film. And I think that that's, and in books. And so but then again, what I want can be an inequal, like that could be something vastly different from someone that maybe is Cuban and might not see representation, or Mexican and might not see as enough representation, or even a group that we haven't talked about, Native Americans. Native Americans have been erased out of films. And so you don't even see Native Americans anymore because of the backlash in the 90s of Pocahontas and the problematic elements of, like, you get what I'm saying, of like the Western films and the way that they portray Native Americans. So you don't really see them. And so you get what I'm saying? So what I want
actually did. Unfortunately, it was the worst movie to have them in, and that was Twilight.
Exactly. Twilight, with sexualizing them. So you have these elements where you have these, you know what I mean? So you have these things, and you have this imbalance no matter what. It's hard to get it across the board. I personally would love to see more films and more shows centered on Native Americans, because I just left my fellowship and I realized how ignorant I am about Native American culture. And this is not only, I'm a minority group, but I have privilege over them still, even as a Black woman, because I have representation in film. I have I live a decent life and stuff like that. There's some people in the Native American culture where they're stuck on reservations and they have problems with mental illness and alcoholism, and they have a hard time finding work, and they're discriminated against in different parts of the country. And sometimes it's even their livelihood that's at stake, and their properties. And so I never have to deal with that. You get what I'm saying? And I'm someone who's a Black woman. So can you imagine, like, that's something in itself that's, you get what I'm saying about the inequality?
I do. And quite frankly, I appreciate the fact that you're being a pioneer that wants to see these kinds of stories, and will probably at some point in time work with those kinds of people to make these kinds of stories. And at the same time, the only thing that I will say that will be your biggest challenge is to find your market, because the average moviegoer is not going to see one of those movies. A person who has a true appreciation for film, who appreciates the subject matter, will go to one of those little art movie houses and go and see that movie. And if it gets traction and ends up getting awards, and if there is a buzz on the street about it, then yes, more people will see those kinds of movies. My attitude is, I don't care who's in the movie as long as the characters are rich and the story is fantastic. That's what I want to see. And on that note, we're going to have to wrap it up, because even though we did go over this little time frame over by 2 minutes, it was important because this conversation will continue. We may have to continue this conversation on Johanna's channel at some point in time, but we have some interesting collaborations coming up between the two of us. We're going to be doing a buddy watch of the comedians on her channel, and at some point in time, probably towards the end of the year, she actually wants to have me on her channel to discuss dating life. I may be married at this point in time, but there are some very interesting things that I have learned, and I'm willing to share my wisdom. But at the same time, Johanna, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to have you. What a conversation. I loved every minute of it. And just remember, everybody, this video will be taken down in a couple of hours and will come back up at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday, which is June the 25th, tomorrow. So in the meantime, Johanna, once again, thank you for coming. I am Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome, and I'm looking forward to seeing each and every one of you back for another episode of Sunday Sit Downs, when we have another great topic to discuss, but always, more importantly, another great YouTuber to discuss it with. I will see you all.
Bye,
You're
guys.
very welcome. I will see you all in the next one. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. If you're new here and want to see more of what my channel has to offer, please click on the link to my last video, or hit that subscribe button to be kept up to date with all of my uploads. Content of all sorts is posted here quite often, so trust me, you do not want to fall behind. I will see you in the comments, and actions speak louder than words.